to welcome you to the Build Your Success podcast today. Thanks for listening to our podcast. We appreciate you for listening. We like to build you so you can build others. We do that through our coaching, training, and speaking events, but we also do that through special guests we bring to the show. I'm excited for part 2 with Bert Thornton. If you haven't listened to part 1, you need to go back and listen to that. We talked about the Waffle House Index related to storm response, and Waffle House does an amazing job with that. But if you haven't listened to that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Bert again. Bert is a U.S. Army veteran. He's an author. He's the former president and chief operating officer of Waffle House. Bert worked his way up through the ranks, beginning as a manager trainee, became vice president, and then as the president and COO, Bert felt his number one priority was the development of quality leaders and leadership skills within the Waffle House management team. And so we've already asked him our signature question about what does leadership mean to you, and you can listen to that on the previous episode. But now we're going to really dive into his newest thing about high impact mentoring and what it means to be a mentor. So welcome back, Bert. We're thankful to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. It's great to be with you.
So let's talk about your book. I got a chance to read some of the transcripts, and it's just an amazing book. I myself have been mentored, and I mentor others. So I understand the importance of mentorship and love it. So when do you see the potential in and inspire others? Why is that important to you?
When I go around the country and talk to people, the number one question I'm asked is, Bert, is there a silver bullet to success? And it turns out there is. And here it is. If you want to be successful, hang around successful people. Who you hang around at every stage in your life determines where you end up in life. You want to be rich? Who do you hang around? Rich people. You want to be respectable? Hang around respectable people. So the silver bullet is hang around the right people. But there's a bigger, better, faster, stronger bullet, and it's the gold bullet. And here it is, critical to your success. While you're hanging around the right people, find a great mentor. You and I know a lot of successful people, Brian, but I don't know a single one, not one, zero, not a one that does not now have or has never had a mentor. A mentor is someone who will guide you through the social, political, cultural, sometimes spiritual aspects of your life and business. I tell young people, a mentor, a great mentor is essential to your success. And they say, oh, okay, thank you for that, Bert. How do I find a great mentor? It's a great question. And here's what I tell them. First thing you need to know is what a great mentor looks like. A great mentor, your great mentor, will have 4 key attributes. The first one is your great mentor will have a sincere interest in you and your personal success. Second, your great mentor will have a demonstrated track record of success. I mean, if not, why in the world would you listen to them? 3, your great mentor will have knowledge or expertise in your particular area of interest. And 4, peer respect. Peer respect. Here's a tip. The greater the peer respect for your mentor, the greater your chances of success. Let me repeat that. The greater the respect by his or her peers for your mentor, the greater your chances of success. With regard to great mentors, peer respect seems to be the ultimate litmus test. So I tell them that, and they say, well, okay, well, yeah, thanks again for that, Bert. Now I know what a great mentor looks like. I think I found mine. What do I do next? How do I engage? And the answer, of course, is you simply walk up and ask. You say something like, Brian, I've been working on some things and I've got some ideas, and you seem to be the expert in this field. This seems to be your wheelhouse. I wonder if we could have a cup of coffee and just talk for a minute. The answer will always be yes, because great mentors are always on the lookout for emerging talent. And you don't need to have an invitation to the mentoring party. As I said, great mentors are always on the lookout. I ran into a young woman at Publix about 2 weeks ago who obviously has it all. She's going to be great wherever she goes. And I gave her a business card and a copy of Find an Old Gorilla and asked her to take a look at it. I asked her, first of all, do you read? Oh yeah, I read every day. So that's great. Reading is learning, learning is growing. If you're not growing, you're falling behind. And she actually did. She read the book. She gave me a call, and we have talked at least once since then in the last couple of weeks.
I appreciate that, Bert, helping others and thinking and recognizing that potential in others. In fact, you sent me that book, and it's an exciting book to read. It's great to understand about modeling is what I really took away from that, and the mentorship involved with that. And I, like you, just ask. Sometimes people are scared to ask. I started this podcast because of a mentor. And in fact, he mentored me for free. He told me, listen, I'll mentor you as long as I see you moving forward. So he told me how to start a podcast. The next thing he told me how to do was write a book. Hey, I barely graduated high school, and English was my worst subject. Thankfully, there's proofreaders and editors and people that help you through those things. So just having a good mentor, and that guy's name's Max Story, Blue Collar Leadership. I've been on his podcast. He's been on mine. But just when you find someone that will help you in life, latch a hold and then show them that their time was valuable to you.
And again, you and I talked a little earlier. We agree on so many things. And I mentioned to you that my happiest friends are not the ones that play the most golf or take the most cruises. They're the ones that lead a life of gratitude for what they have, and they're willing to give back to other people, to grab them and pull them up and give them whatever they need to become as successful, not as they want to be, but as they deserve to be. And that, ergo, your mentors, I'll stick with you as long as you're worth it.
Well, if they're going to invest time in you, time's the most precious commodity we have. And if they're going to invest that in you, they want to see some results from it. So they're going to invest to do that.
I had a Waffle House manager come up to me one time and say, when is somebody going to start developing me? And I said, well, we're going to do that right now. I'd like a copy of it later, but for the time being, why don't you give me an idea of your personal self-development plan? And I got that deer in the headlights look. And I said, you don't have one, do you? He said, no, sir, I don't. I said, how can you expect other people to invest time in you when you're not willing to invest time in yourself? So we worked together on his strengths and weaknesses in his self-development plan, and he turned out to be a senior leader in the Waffle House system years later.
That is an awesome story, an example of mentorship. I'm curious, Bert, do you have someone that you recognize as your mentor early on? And you may not be able to name them if they want to remain anonymous, but maybe you can name them. I'm not sure.
No, I had the same ones you did early on. Our mentors are people that are older than we are. We think that because somebody's older, they have more information than we do, which may or may not be true. But we think because they're older, they're right, which may or may not be true. And then, I played a lot of football. I went to Georgia Tech on a football scholarship, played for Bobby Dodd back when the earth was still cooling. And so my early mentors were coaches. And then, of course, I was in the Army, and you have senior leaders, the ones that you like and respect, end up being your mentors. So that's where mentors come from. It's all about respect, your respect for them, their peer respect, and their sincere interest in making you better.
I love this idea about peer respect, and it'll transition well into what I wrote down to ask you about. In the book, you wrote one of the 5 critical fundamental concepts is reward follows performance. In a world that tries to give people participation in trophies and those type of things, I think this is really relevant. I think some people need to understand you're going to get rewarded after you make something happen.
Right. I tell people that for me, a successful life is about adding value, and where better to add value than another person's life. But you can't expect any reward until you add value. I always use the example of the guy who sits in the cold living room in the dead of winter looks at his fireplace and says, "Give me some heat and I'll go get you some wood." He doesn't understand that if you want heat, you got to go outside, you got to find the tree, you got to chop it down, you got to cut it up, you got to drag it in, you got to get the fire started. And if you do all that right, then you get a little heat. Reward rarely precedes performance. It follows performance. And here's another thing people need to understand. It doesn't follow on the same day. We have a lot of folks out there who get frustrated when they don't see cause and effect, reward and performance in the same time frame. You and I both know that when reward follows performance, it's very rarely immediate. Sometimes it takes days, weeks, or even years, and that's okay. That's just the way it works. But you got to hang in there and keep creating value, keep adding value, and the reward will come.
I love the fact you mentioned it doesn't happen overnight or in a day. In fact, you and I had a conversation about investing in our previous podcast, and my mom taught me, she's one of my great mentors, and I love her and everything she's done for me. But one of the things she taught me, she said, "Brian, every time you get a raise, give your 401k a raise." And so I habitually did that and invested for 25 years and going to continue to invest. And it's amazing to me what those small weekly amounts has become through investing, and then also through the gains that happen, through investing in the right stuff. So that's how wonderful things.
And how wonderful that your mom told you that. See, some of these things are not intuitive. You think they are. You and I think they are because we've lived them forever. But this is. Do you know what a BFO is?
I don't.
It's a term that I use. A BFO is a blinding flash of the obvious. Wow. Okay, give your savings account a raise. Give your IRA a raise. Wow. But now that it's the most obvious thing in the world for a person to do. I'll tell you a little mentoring story. You asked me about a successful mentoring situation, and this stuff that you think is intuitive, but it's really not. It's a little peek behind the Waffle House curtain. It's a story about a guy by the name of Dave Rickle. I first met Dave when he was a young Waffle House manager in Atlanta. He had the Waffle House right off Northside Drive, close to the Georgia Tech campus in Midtown Atlanta. I had heard about Dave for some time, bright young guy, premium university, Cornell graduate, lacrosse player, ex-athlete, great core values, great people skills. So I knew I had to meet him. So I went to his restaurant early one evening when I knew he'd be working the supper shift. And I pulled in the parking lot, walked in the restaurant. Dave was right where he was supposed to be, behind the counter, taking care of business. He rushed out to shake my hand and meet me. And we talked for a few minutes there, and then we got behind the counter and did what Waffle House people do for you and everyone else all day long. We cooked, we cleaned, we washed dishes, we bussed table, did whatever we needed to do. And then I took Dave in the back to get to know him a little better. And that's when he asked me the question that would change his life and his career forever. He said, "Bert, how do I get promoted?" I said, "It's simple, Dave. You make yourself the obvious choice. You make yourself the obvious choice." He said, "Great. How do I do that?" So what ensued then and over the next 15 or so years was a series of conversations, mentoring conversations about what it takes to succeed in life and business. Brian, I ran into Dave about 5 weeks ago at the Waffle House corporate office in Atlanta. And I asked Dave the question I'm fond of asking people I raised in the business but haven't seen for a while. I said, "Dave, what have you learned since I saw you last?" He said, "Bert, I learned you were right." I said, "Great answer, Dave." "Right about what?" He said, "You remember the first night we met?" I told him I remember it well. He said, "You looked me in the eye and you said, 'Dave, you can succeed if you care, if you try, if you learn, if you stay.' You can succeed if you care, if you try, if you learn, if you stay." Dave said, "You told me, Dave, you got to care. If you don't care, nothing else matters. But caring alone is not enough. Caring will get you into the starting gate, but you've got to try hard to get out on the track and beat the competition." and you told me I had to learn something every day. I had to read something every day, and I have. And you told me I had to stay. You said, Dave, there'll be 100 reasons every week for you to do something different, but you need to stay and bloom where you're planted. So Dave did stay. Today, and Dave's done well, by the way. Today, Dave is one of 3 operational executive vice presidents that run over 2,000 Waffle Houses in 25 states. On Dave's P&L, his top line on his P&L, his organization's annual revenue is in excess of $1 billion with a B dollars. And on any given day, Dave has between 30 and 35,000 people working for him. So I tell people Dave's done well, but he hadn't done any better than we can do if we care, if we try, if we learn, if we stay. You got to care the most. You got to try the hardest. You got to learn something every day. If your company or your job is growing faster than you are, you're falling behind. And you got to stay. All your life, people will try to convince you the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. But here's what you need to know. Everybody's grass has dirt on the bottom. You just got to be standing close enough to see it. That's the power of positive, worthwhile, great mentoring.
That is a great example of Dave and how well he's done with just a little bit of guidance and committing to that. You talked about making yourself the obvious choice. It reminded me, I became a construction mentor for the ACE Mentor program and got invited to be a judge at the Skills USA competition. It's national competition. All these people come together and do all kind of different skills. But I was a judge for the carpentry competition. And when I asked one of the other judges, I was like, man, there's 40 of these students. How in the world are we going to decide which one of them is the winner? You know, he said, listen, they will self-eliminate going forward.
Right.
And I remember it very vividly. I'm watching all these things. One of them is just really standing out. I'm watching him. And about 10 minutes before the time was up, he folds up his drawing, sits down, he's done. And not another student was done. And when we inspected it, there was only about 4 that really needed inspecting to determine who the winners were.
Right.
And when we inspected his, every bolt was in the right place, the siding was in the right place. He had done it per the drawing, and he stood out. It was an obvious choice. Yes. Yeah. So I appreciate that and understand that. And
well,
I'm going to remember that.
Mentoring is such a critical thing. Again, we think these success tactics, and by the way, in Find an Old Gorilla, there's a whole chapter on what I call success tactics, the 10 basic laws of success, or what I think they are. We think they're intuitive at this age and stage, but they are things that we absolutely need to advise and inspire in up and coming people. And that's why I wrote both books. Find an Old Gorilla was my first effort. It's only, I think, 76 pages long. A buddy of mine said, why don't you make it longer? I said, Dan, to be honest with you, that's really all I had to say. But it's actually in its 2nd printing now. And it's been called The Rising High Achiever's Guide to What to Do Next, the Emerging Leader's Handbook. The publicist for the 2nd book called it Self-Mentoring in a Box because it was aimed at the mentee. And not unlike High Impact Mentoring, the 2nd book, High Impact Mentoring, that's a key word, practical, a practical guide to creating value in other people's lives. I co-wrote that with my good friend, Dr. Sherry Hartnett, who is a marketing consultant and a professor at the University of West Florida. I wrote the across the table piece, how to deliver a positive, impactful, successful mentoring experience. She wrote the macro piece, how to scale that up into a small, medium, or large organization, as she's done at the University of West Florida Executive Mentoring Program, where she has 120 Pensacola leaders mentoring UWF juniors and seniors and alumni. So we wrote that to lift folks out of the fog, and it is a practical guide. Most of the books that I've read on mentoring are either, you know, heavy tomes about the history of mentoring, or cute little books about Johnny and Jill who take great advice and live happily ever after, or they're really good books, but they're just not practical enough to be a guide for do this, don't do that. And so high impact mentor, and you can, as you alluded, the actual website is highimpactmentoringbook.com, highimpactmentoringbook.com. Everything you want to know about that book, and actually find an old gorilla, is on that website. But we wrote that high impact mentoring to bring, there's an ironic situation in America today. On the one hand, you've got this multitude of rising high achievers who would benefit greatly from the experience and the wisdom of a Brian Rogan. And on the other hand, you've got this legion of savvy organizational leaders who could, would, and should fit that bill, but they're not getting together. And why is that? One of the reasons is that this group of potential leaders, they don't know that, some of them don't know there's a resource like that out there. And if they did, they might be a little shy to ask. And again, on the other hand, you've got this group of potentially great mentors who don't have a conduit back to these potential stars. And if they did, they might think, well, maybe I'll screw this up. So that's why we wrote the book. It's basically a step-by-step how-to book, how to identify a potentially worthwhile mentee and deliver exactly what that person needs after you've done a deep dive to determine where the real issues are.
That is great. And I love that another example that you shared. It's real world stuff. It's not just hypothetical or institutional, but it's real world practice that you've got experience with. So we're going to finish this second episode with.
I will tell you this.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, knock on wood, high impact mentoring, a practical guide to creating value in other people's lives, has been sold out on Amazon twice, and for which we are very grateful. It's in stock right now. I know that. So thank you, everybody who, not only who bought the book, but everybody who's using that to help other people be successful.
I so appreciate that, Bert. We'll definitely share that in our notes for those listeners. I have one final question I wrote down for you. Change is constant. That's something I picked up out of the book. How do you manage change? And then I really want to think about, I was at a conference last week and we talked about the millennials. And they talk about millennials as if they're some zombies or some weirdos or whatever. And I'm like, it's just another generation. In fact, while you were serving in Vietnam, I think your parents and those people would have said, all they want to do is smoke dope and make love, so that every generation's got its complexities.
Well,
how can we handle change?
Yeah, my daddy used to say there's nothing new under the sun, Brian, just a different crowd doing it. Millennials are no different. I actually own 3 of them. I have 3 daughters, all Georgia Tech girls, bright girls, all very successful business women and mothers. And millennials are just, as you say, just another generation. Change. That's one of my FAQs. One of the frequently asked questions is, why is change so difficult? You and I both know the only thing constant in life is change. That's the only thing that you can count on. Change is going to come. There's even a song about that. Change is going to come. So the first step in coping with change is understanding what it really is. You're best equipped to cope with things when you fully understand them. There are 2 kinds of change. There is initiated change. That's the change that you start and you control, you own it. And there are actually, I don't know how much time we have here, but there are 7 steps to initiated change, and they're all in They're all in the book. You know what the first step in initiated change is?
I don't remember. Let's remind me.
That's change that you're trying to create, that you want to do it. It may be a lifestyle change, or you may be trying to change anything. But the first step is always denial. Denial that a change that needs to be made. You know what the largest state in the nation is, by the way? It's not California. It's not Alaska. It's the state of denial, because everybody lives in it at one point in time. So the first step is denial that a change needs to be made. The next step is acceptance that a change needs to be made. Third step is attempt to make that change. And the fourth step is failure. It's always out there. You try it and it doesn't work. So the fifth stage is frustration. We keep doing the same old thing. We go back doing the same old thing, and we're expecting a different result, which is the height of insanity. And the sixth stage is re-engagement, refocus, regroup, retry. And then the seventh stage is success. And you can always get to 7 if you don't get hung up on 4. You can always get to success if you don't get hung up on failure. So that's initiated change. The other kind of change is inherited change. That's not the change that we create, but the change that we inherit. Somebody else starts it, somebody else controls it, somebody else owns it. You may like it or you may not, but the one thing that you have to do is cope with it. And when you're coping with inherited change, you got only one of 4 options. You can mope, hope, dope, or cope. You can mope about it. You can hope it'll get better. You can stick your head in the sand and pretend it's not there. We call that ostrich management, by the way. Or you can cope with it. And the first step in coping with it is to ask yourself, am I really affected by this change, or am I just annoyed by it? And because the answer to that question will determine how serious it is and how you need to deal with it. Most people think that I don't like it, so I'm just going to quit. I'm just going to go away. So, but people, people who are sailing on a ship that changes direction and they don't want to go that direction, jumping off the ship may not be the answer, because that's one of the most serious stressors there is. The serious stressors are losing a loved one or a friend, changing your occupation, or changing your residence. Those are the ones that you never want to try and do, have 2 of those occur in any one year. So that's what you cope best with stress if you understand what it really is and how it really affects you. If you're just annoyed by it, hey, learn to live with it. It'll go away.
Like you said, the only thing about change is it's going to happen. So yeah, just wait. If you don't like change, stick around. It's going to change. Well, we appreciate your time. You were with us for 2 episodes. That's we only had that a few times in our podcast history, but definitely great content. We first talked about the Waffle House Index and how your team and your previous career leads in that area. And then we actually talked about mentorship and the value of that and how it's so much needed in our society today to reach back and help the younger. And hey, I've been mentored by people that are younger than I am, in fact. So it's always good to find someone that knows more than you do, has more experience, and can help you. We just want to appreciate you for taking the time to be on the podcast today. Thanks to our listeners for listening. Again, where can we find that book at? I want you to say it so we get it right.
highimpactmentoringbook.com, just like it sounds, highimpactmentoringbook.com. It's available on Amazon, as is Find an Old Gorilla. And Brian, let me just tell you one more time, I have done many podcasts, and you've got a great one, and I have never enjoyed more the time I've spent with somebody. You're a great interviewer, and it's just been a real absolute pleasure to be with you today.
Well, thank you, Bert. I appreciate that. And in fact, I just discovered you on LinkedIn, so I'd encourage listeners to reach out. Bert's very accessible on LinkedIn, responded almost immediately to be a guest. I've told people before, hey, sometimes I just ask and some amazing people show up on the podcast, and I consider Bert one of those. He and I are going to have hours of conversation later, just be off the podcast, so got a new friend here. So thank you, Bert, for that. Thanks for listening to the podcast today. Do me a favor, go over to wherever you're listening to this podcast, give us an honest rating and review. Share this podcast with others. I know they can get some great advice and some great content from Bert and what he shared with us today. Thanks for listening to the podcast.